What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Grab Your Torch with Caleb and Joel. We are here to recap Survivor 48, episode 7, where we had a double boot episode. There's a lot of entertaining moments, but I feel like for the most part, it was pretty straightforward. I don't know. What about you?
Yeah, this was a very straightforward forward episode. Definitely like the symmetry between Say and Cedric going. I think it's fitting they went in the same, I guess, technical round. But once Say went, I was like, yeah, Cedric's going.
Right.
Uh, but overall, this was we got to see more dynamics. Big episode for Mitch, big episode for Joe and David. Um, and overall, I think this kind of set up some future plot points going forward, specifically with Shaheen's idol.
Yeah, I agree. There's some good setup here. Congrats to Mary to being the final original Vula member. Like, that's kind of
Shout
crazy that we're
out.
already here, final 10. She's already the last one. But It's it's been really fun to watch. I agree. Like there's a lot of interesting moments. I guess we could just kind of start off the top with, Mitch just kind of being in a corner and kind of realizing that he was alone and didn't really know what was going on with the charity boot.
Yeah. He definitely had a lot of bounce back this episode, specifically from that. He kind of like talked about, he's like, yeah, I'm like, I need to, wake up to smell the roses. And he did that by telling his stories. He told it to Joe and Shaheen. And we got to see him like go around talking to people, which like obviously worked, showed showed off at the end of the episode, saving him basically. But we also see Shaheen eventually talk about, he's like, yeah, everyone on the bottom's doing that right now if they're a good player. So, you know, um, that might have taken away a little, but overall, this was like a very good episode for Mitch. And I don't know, who knows? He might be able to squeak by and go on a deep run.
Yeah, I'd love to see that. He's been definitely super entertaining. It's really fun to root for him since he's like from Waco and being in Waco right now. Like kind of hometown hero vibes. So that's just been really fun to watch, and root for him with that. He's been around at a lot of like different events around here, so that's been really cool
That's
to see
cool.
too. I haven't personally had a chance to meet him yet, but I'd love to at some point. It would be really cool. But besides that, yeah, I think he had a really good bounce back episode. He's playing really well right now, in my opinion. Like, even though he's kind of stuck at the bottom, he's really keeping his options open, and I think the players made the smart decision to kind of keep him around just because they could scoop him up in as a number instead of just like voting him out. They could take out someone else that might actually be a little bit more volatile than him, like say. And so I think it really ended up working by him just kind of being like, "Hey, I'm a free number. Please use me if you want to." Kind of keeping their options open. And I think it being a split tribal really helped with that too, because it kind of gave them the opportunity, which I'm not a fan of the split tribal. Not a lot of people are. I think it causes the players to play safe. And that's kind of what we saw tonight. We didn't really get to see anyone kind of go big. Everyone was wanting to make the jury. So first off, the side with Mitch, they were all worried about that. So they were like, okay, we should probably take out Say because she'll vote for who knows what her vote will be at the in the jury. But I think it just really causes the players to play safe. That's why I have a problem with like three tribes start at the beginning in the small tribes in general, just because they don't really, make moves right outside of like their little circle. They just kind of like try to hide, and like try to coast to the end, which, you know, there's arguments for the other side too. If like you start on a 10 person tribe, then you also could hide there too. So I guess you can hide anywhere, but I feel like it causes the players not to like pull off as big of a move or anything like that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think this episode, to me, the most interesting like aspect was like, okay, like who we not putting on the jury? Because when we'll talk about the challenge, because obviously broke records, quote unquote broke records. It was actually kind of crazy. We actually got an endurance challenge that lasts more than like 30 minutes.
Exactly.
Yeah. But like I was thinking during that, if you're in the position of David and Joe, like I feel like and you've won immunity and you've broken a record, like you put in a valiant effort. Like at one point do you just like I have control of like who doesn't make the jury. That's more powerful than who makes it in a lot of senses.
Sure.
And so like specifically for Joe, like first off, we didn't even talk they didn't even mention it, even didn't even have to play her idol. But like, he made a really good point. He was like, I wanted Charity and Say to go, and that's what happened. He didn't want to making the jury. And now here we are, and now he has two votes that he has controlled. And then with David, we see that he got to see who did make the jury, which was Shaheen. And I do, or was he kept Shaheen, voted out Cedric,
Right.
which what a downfall for that guy.
I know
But
he didn't speak a word at tribal council. Like I don't think he did at all from what I remember. Like
bro's so bad at challenges too. Oh my
and
goodness.
his exit confessional was also pretty disappointing too. He was like, "Well, I have a lot of time to think about who to vote for." And that's about
This,
all he said.
yeah, it's like, I think it's Cedric.
I wish
Uh,
we got more from him, but he he voted interestingly while he was there. So that was fun to watch.
yeah. So I think we should get into specifically the challenge and like
Yeah.
the tribe swap. So I believe on the Orange Tribe it was Star, Chrissy, Eva, Joe, Mitch, and Say. What do you
Yeah.
think of the original one?
Like what do you think of what do you mean?
Like what do you think of like that I guess tribe to begin with?
Yeah, I thought it was an interesting split. Eva still has her idol, which is I think that's kind of impressive at this point. I really hope she doesn't go home with it in her pocket because that'd just be really disappointing to see. But she made it through another week with it. I thought that her or Joe would have won on that side, and it did come down to either one of them. And so I thought she was just going to play her idol, be safe no matter what. I think if the other players were smart, they would have tried to take a shot at her, at that point,
Yeah,
and try to do something because, they're the ones in control, and, Chrissy, Mitch, and Say were instead of all fighting for each other, they could have just like, hey, let's work together and try to pull something off.
mhm.
But I think as far as the dynamics were, I think it was pretty easy from the outset to see that Say was on the outs there and was probably likely to go home in that spot.
Yeah, I agree. Especially when Joe won immunity. Like, if you're Chrissy or Star or any of those guys, you're like, I mean, Eva's gonna play it,
Right. And especially since they're the last one to not make the jury, I think that also really helps contribute to that as well, just because,
I
you know,
agree.
that's been kind of the story of Say all season is that she's volatile, she's crazy, she does a lot of stuff that's unpredictable and, people kind of butt heads with her. And so I think it was a smart move for all of them to just kind of knock her off at that point.
I agree. And then we move on to the Purple Tribe, which had David, Kyle, Camilla, Shaheen, then Cedric and Mary,
Yeah.
which I thought was, in a way, Cedric was just like, he just got
He
absolutely
was screwed to begin
destroyed.
with. I really do think like, this Shaheen kind of planting seeds, a lot of it was all smoke screen to me. I think they, put a lot of these scenes in just kind of like to, you know, add to the red herring of it. Um, but I do think it was a really good episode for Shaheen, even though because I thought at this point,
Really?
even though he said a lot
Wow.
of things that you're not really supposed to say, like I'm about to win, I'm in a really good spot on my tribe, he didn't go home. That's I feel like at that point that means that um he's probably going to go pretty deep just because I think he has a lot of winning characteristics. And people do see him as a threat. We got to see that a lot from Rachel. A lot of people were gunning for Rachel around this time last season. They're saying, hey, Rachel's a big threat. We should probably take her out. And she was able to make it by. And then they forgot about her for a few weeks, and all of a sudden she went on an immunity run and made it to the end. And so I think, I don't know if Shaheen can go on an immunity run, but I do think he has the legs to go far in the game. And I do think him not going in this spot really improved his chances to me because, you know, I think if he did go home, it would make sense just because we've seen this a million times when someone says, I know I'm the best player on this island, I'm gonna win. And then they go home. We've seen that a bunch. But when it turns around and he has proof to back it up, he doesn't go home, he stays true to his connections. I think that might suggest him going further.
I definitely can see the reasoning for him. Obviously, this wasn't the best episode. This has been kind of like two episodes I can say specifically where we've seen Shaheen like not know what's happening truly. Now, I think I agree that like probably a lot of it was like they had to make it interesting, and Kyle and Camilla were planting the seeds here. But he did put like a little catalyst to like how he's gonna win. We kind of saw that with like Owen in season 43 that he was like, I got to play perfectly from now on. And if I don't, I'm going to lose. And we see him now, Shaheen being like, hey, if I hold control and power, I can win this thing. And he did hold control. He did hold trust. Like all the things he said did come true, but they also have to keep coming true for the next couple episodes. But I do agree that overall, like the fact that he stayed was like very nice. You could tell he was like, he recognized that like this was the shot. Like they can definitely go after him.
Hmm.
Um, but I agree, and I think David played a really good big part into this, which I don't think for David it would have made sense to take Shaheen out here. And realistically, I don't think it made sense for Kyle or Camilla either.
Yeah, I'd agree too. I think, going ahead with the strong alliance was probably, optimal for all of them. And we've seen, time and time again in the new era where just like a strong alliance will dominate and you'll make it far at that point. We've seen though the last, two seasons we've seen, these I mean, you can count D in that too, but she was part of an alliance. But I would say especially in 46 and 47, we've seen these, really strong women that have played really well socially and strategically, you know, kind of slip their way in because, they've gone around these alliances. And I think that we'll see a little bit of that, maybe, unless this group can somehow stay together. I feel like the preview for next week suggests otherwise, but we'll see what
Uh,
happens.
I, we'll talk about the preview later, but I do feel like that's kind of smokescreen. I feel like that's more like remember when Drew like threw the pot, but it
Right.
was like just him being frustrated about reward. I think it's something like that where like David probably doesn't know how close Camilla and Kyle like actually are. It was like, hey, maybe Kyle or maybe Camilla and Kyle's like, oh,
Right.
something like that. But because we only really get to see like everyone be like, David's going crazy from Camilla's point of view.
Hmm.
So I have hope on that. But going back to tribal and everything, I think to me, um, the most interesting part was first off, Chrissy absolutely like, what are you talking about, bruh? She was like, yeah, like you can't win Survivor just off of like, getting a strong alliance. Like it was the philosophy debate of like you need to make moves, you need to build a resume versus like what Joe's saying, building a strong alliance and having a good story.
Well, I think he was also saying, going with honor and integrity, and she was kind of
Yeah.
saying like you actually have to lie to win Survivor. We've seen that most seasons. I don't think there's been any winner that's not lied in this season. Like, I don't know. Maybe there has been, like, maybe Tom, but I don't know. I think he also lied at
Yeah, but
times
Tom
too.
could also afford not to lie.
Yeah, exactly. So I think at that point, like, she was right to say that, like, we can't just only have honor and integrity. I do think it was really bold for her to like actually speak out and just, kind of say that,
Yeah.
say what she was
In front of
thinking.
Joe too is nuts.
Right. And I think it was entertaining because we don't get a lot from Tribal, in recent seasons. I feel like, Jeff doesn't really press too deeply into, questioning people and asking them about different things that have happened. And so as a result of that, I think it becomes a lot more stale and we get a lot of, ambiguity and analogies and stuff like which kind of smoke up the entire tribal council where we don't really know actually what's happening because the beauty of tribal from back in the day was because they would just Jeff would be like, hey, so I saw you weren't getting along with this person at the challenge, like tell me about that, and they have to like Jeff kind of like doesn't really throw him under the bus or anything, but he just kind of calls out things that he sees, but he doesn't really do much of that anymore. I think he's trying not to interfere with the game, but I do think that's kind of detracted from tribal being as entertaining.
I agree. And I think Jeff is I think he's trying not to interfere. We saw in the Know-It-Alls episode from like Rob Has a Podcast, they talked about like when Jeff is like goofy and everything, like the vote's gonna be like 12-1. But when
Right.
he's like serious, it's like a blind side's happening. And they talked about when Rachel idled, like he was acting like if Rachel was going home, like he was playing into it.
Yeah.
And, so I think he's done a pretty good job of like trying to like take a step back, basically. Especially with this season, I kind of appreciate that he's not like because Say was already like antagonizing, but he didn't have to do anything.
Right.
But I kind of wish on like seasons like 44 or like seasons where like people are just like not antagonizing each other. They're like just playing safe and sorry. Like I wish Jeff would like, step in
Yeah,
and push those guys.
yeah, for sure. I'd agree with that too.
Yeah. So what were your thoughts on Joe versus David? Like the actual like the editing with Shaheen doing all the
Yeah,
voices.
that was such a good moment. I enjoyed it a lot. These are just one of these moments that's like, it's not always about the strategy, like the challenges can be really fun. Even though we saw this like literally last season, and we've seen it a bunch of times before. It's still like any endurance challenge for me is probably the most entertaining ones, just because like it's cool to see like how much people fight. And it was also really nice of Jeff to actually say like how long they were up there because I missed the timestamps that they used to do for challenges, and it was also a really long challenge in general. So I really appreciated that too. So I think them competing, it being a long challenge, I thought it was super entertaining, and of course Shaheen doing the tribal music was great.
Oh, it was so funny. And they added like the same clip of him over again and like um it was kind of honestly looking at the challenge, I'm so sure David could have gone for like 4 hours. Like it did not bother him at all. He was literally just like,
Exactly. He was locked the entire time. I didn't think he was gonna budge. As soon as it became between him and Kyle, I was like, Kyle's struggling a lot more than he is. I think Kyle's gonna drop pretty soon. And then they went on to go for another like 20 minutes after that. So it was really
yeah.
impressive.
And he like the whole time he was just trying to tell Joe, he's like, I know I have it.
Yeah, he's not dropping.
His grip string was like nuts.
Yeah, I was
Also,
impressed with
shout out
Joe
the
staying up
Gabler
that long though.
reference. We
Yeah, the
love a good
Gabler reference
Gabler
is
reference.
awesome.
Out of all people, they look he referenced him a lot.
Yeah, I know. I mean, it's kind of Gabler's challenge until now.
That's true. Yeah, shout out Alaska. I think that's what he shouted out. Uh, that and
Yeah.
his family, but who cares about them? Um, but I think overall this episode was just kind of like, and the season that's been so good. This has been one of like the more middling one. It wasn't even like a bad episode, but we've seen a lot of like pretty high strategy, high character moments. And we did have some pretty good ones here, but this one was just like, all right.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was still a good episode. I think it really carries the narrative forward, which
Mhm.
is important because, I think it's more or less a setup episode because we didn't really see any like heavy hitters go home at this point, but I do think like we're really setting up to have a really good, finale slash, this final 10 are all have their own chances to win. I think any one of these people can win. I don't really see Chrissy winning at this point, but you know, anyone else probably has a shot to win, which is really exciting. I don't think
Yeah,
I remember a season in a while that's been this many contenders this late in the game.
I completely agree. Now, people like Mary and Star aren't in the best spot to win it just because they've had episodes with like zero confessionals or like very little content. But like, I'm so happy like Mary and Star are there. They're such good characters. Like Cedric immediately falling and it just cuts to Mary just shaking her head was so funny to me. Like it's little stuff like that I think have been really making the season that we don't really have a dud outside of Chrissy. And then Chrissy comes along and like, kind of blows up a little and like talks to Joe about the philosophy of the game, which I enjoyed.
Yeah, it
And
was a really good, interesting moment, and she had some good content outside of that today too, with you know, questioning whether or not to vote out Mitch.
exactly. And I think like around this time like the last few seasons, like we kind of like knew who was gonna win. Like around the we I mean, I guess Kinsey winning, but like for the general like Superman community, like by the time of the merge, it was like pretty obvious Kinsey was winning. And around this time now, like after Rachel finds her idol, it was like she was gaining a lot of momentum and going on to steamroll the rest of the game. Right here, I mean, yeah, you have Joe, you have David, like you have Kyle and Camilla, but like that's already four people that have a very legitimate shot of winning. Not mentioning Eva, not mentioning Mitch. Like we have some like legitimate contenders.
Absolutely.
And this
There's
is a very well edited season.
I agree. I think they did a really good job setting up who, the last final 10 were going to be. You know, again, Chrissy, not as much. They've barely given her much content, which is sad. But I do think we've really seen, Star recently in the last couple episodes have stepped it up a lot. With not only her confessionals, but just like her content in general. Like she's, had a lot of stuff, outside of that with like her tribe life and giving Eva the idol and stuff. So I think we've seen a boost in like pretty much all of these people that are here. And then Kyle and Camilla still being undercover, with Final 10. Like this is really impressive.
That's huge.
I do think Kyle has a really good chance to win. A lot of people were really thinking that Kyle was going to go home this week and thinking like this
Interesting.
this Shaheen boot was gonna kind of backfire on him, based on the preview. Um,
That,
but I had a little bit of doubt just because of how many people were reading into that. But I also thought like, he's just so well positioned. He's the least, I said this last week, but he's like the least threatening of this five alliance. And then even less threatening is Camilla, who's outside of this, five alliance technically. And then we also, outside of this, five plus Camilla, six, we have, Mary, Chrissy, Star, and then who am I missing? Mitch. So like we
Mitch.
have a good like outside group too. They are
Yeah.
all playing really well in my opinion. So we have a really interesting, final 10. I'm excited to see how this shapes out.
Yeah. If I had to, I feel like my winner picks have always been like shifting, where like obviously I was a big Thomas fan. Um, Even like before the season, I was like, maybe Cedric got it, but I was very wrong. And last few episodes, I've been like, it's Joe. And now I'm like, kind of like, oh, it was Kyle. And now I'm like, is it David? Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
And I think at this point, I'm sticking with Joe just because, like, when you look at things that are consistent, he said charity and say, I need out before the jury. And that's like a really like, that's like huge in my mind. Like, he got his way both
Yeah.
time. He's got a lot of personal content. Like we get rarely, I don't think, Jeff does it where he's like, how does this immunity like feel for you? He's like, oh, like I'm doing this for my kid, like my kids, and then contrasted with David, getting the money to have kids, which
Right.
David, find another woman. She, I think, David, you're such a huge, like objectively attractive guy. Surely there is someone
And
that will live
also he
together with
seems
you.
super genuine too. I think
He's
he
such a nice guy.
yeah, it seems really sweet. So, if this girl's hung up about money, I think you could do better.
Yeah, I mean, David, realistically, bruv, she wants 4 kids. That's like 7 years in the making. You got a while to go. So hopefully you get that mill. If not, be on 50.
It's
Uh,
true.
so I don't know. I'm gonna say Joe. David's had a few inconsistencies, but it's like this episode specifically, I think, showed off why David is a good player in a way that's like this is like a very old school style of play from
I
both these
agree.
guys. It's working.
And I think that's part of the reason why I've enjoyed this season a lot is because of that. Like it's not super crazy. I don't think we're gonna have the most social winner this season. I think we'll have, someone who plays more strategically, who's more of an overdog. So I
Yeah.
think that would be interesting. I think Shaheen is still my winner pick. And I'm still confident in that. I mean, he's my winner pick for my fantasy draft, so that's kind of why I'm sticking with him. But I also think I might be reading it too much into it, but I think his edit tonight and just in general throughout the season, even though he's had a couple misses, they were earlier on and he's bounced back from that. And we've seen not only him saying that he's in a good position, which usually is a death threat, death sentence, and he kind of avoided that today. Um, but Chrissy also said when they were talking about who they thought was going to go home, they're like, "Oh yeah, it'll probably end up being Cedric." They're like, "Well, who would be someone interesting to go home?" They're like, "If they're smart, they'd take out Shaheen because he's playing
Ooh,
really well."
that's true.
And so I think that's kind of also another little snippet that
Mm,
could contribute to him
I like
going
how
to
you're
the end and
thinking.
winning.
I definitely, you're starting to change my mind a little. Plus alternates do well. Shout out the alternates.
Shout out the alternates.
But I definitely agree. That'd be smart. I would like to see like I think we're bound to get a final three with like two people that are like legitimately competing for like the title. Because I can imagine like them being like, oh, we have to take out the ghost, we have to take out, Chrissy, and like then whoever they don't think can like win. But like, there's always one goat that stays,
Right.
and that person usually makes it to the end. So I can definitely imagine that happening.
Yeah,
And
there's no way there'll be three contenders, but I could see two strong contenders. And, with how much the producers are loving this season, apparently, rumors are, Jeff loves the season. We've talked about this some. There could be a tie. Who knows?
oh, hey,
That'd be fun
hey,
to watch.
last time they had a tie, that was one of my favorite moments of all of Survivor because that was just nuts.
It was. That'd go
It'd
crazy.
be really cool to see a tie. Um, I definitely think the fire making like I think David's gonna make it the fire. That's my hot take, but I think he's gonna lose. I think either
That could
Joe or
happen.
David's gonna lose in fire, like the fan favorite falls short.
I mean,
Um,
that usually happens.
yeah, because believe it or not, fire making at 4 doesn't help the threats.
Exactly.
Yeah,
It just pushes them back further. Now
yeah,
they
it just
go
makes
more at
everyone
five or four instead.
like
But
it all
let's talk
misplace.
about predictions for next week. What do you think's gonna happen?
Chrissy. I think David is gonna get some heat. But I think there's a shot he just like wins immunity. He like all this happens before immunity. He wins immunity, and they're like, okay, Chrissy. That's my prediction. I know it's not that like in depth, but I don't think David's going anywhere. I think Camilla is might be playing a little too hard right now, which I didn't think I would be saying, but like if she really is like setting this up for Shaheen and then she's setting this stuff up for David, like that's good if she can pull it off. But like, she's making enemies of two of the biggest players of the season and two people that like David just saved Shaheen essentially. So I don't know. A little worried for her, especially since she's not getting the most content since the merge. It's been kind of replaced by Kyle.
Yeah.
So I'm a little worried for her,
Do you think
but
that somehow their alliance could be found out this next week?
I don't think this week. I think they make like final 7, final 6, and then it'll get found out.
Yeah, and do you think one of them will turn on each other?
Hot take, I think Kyle turns on her.
I do too. I think Kyle has shown that he has probably more guts
Yeah, he
than
definitely has that
the
killer
Houston face.
instinct.
Yeah, he has a
The whole
killer
thing has
instinct.
been like, I've been lying to people and I have to keep lying to people.
Right. And he was also talking about last week, with the merge, when they started getting together with this like big power alliance, he was like, they're all preaching honesty and loyalty. I have to keep lying about me and Camilla being a strong alliance. So I can't really blow up that spot and try to fit in with them by, being honest and loyal. So who knows? I think I do. Kyle is playing really well. He's my fantasy player, which is different from my winner pick. So like he's racking up
Yeah,
points by winning challenges and doing things like that. So I hope
goat.
that he continues to do that. He's been really fun to watch.
Yeah, I definitely see a world where like in my head, like the big, like those two are definitely going to take out one of the big four. It probably is Eva realistically. I don't know. I don't think I could see Eva winning just because I don't see like Eva outplacing Joe, and I think people would vote for Joe over Eva.
Yeah,
I could see those two getting a tie though.
exactly. This is the spot where I believe Saul went last season at this final 10. And
Mhm.
so I do think we could see one of those, kind of in the running players go home this week. Instead of one of the like four people that are on the outside, I probably would see one of the five people in the major alliance going home this week. Five or
Yeah.
six people. I think it honestly could be Camilla this week. That's kind of my hot take, but I
Yeah.
think it might end up being Camilla somehow.
I think okay, you got Camilla.
Yeah,
I'm gonna say Chrissy because like she's either like going this episode or she's like the goat. You know what I mean?
right.
Like I I just can't see her getting much farther because we just don't see her perspective.
Yeah, if she doesn't go this week, she's final three locked.
Yeah.
Or she somehow loses in fire making, something like that.
Oh, oh no. No, Chrissy, my goat loses in fire. Joe makes it.
Dang it.
Dang it. The season's ruined, guys.
Yeah. It's not her fault. She seems really cool, and I think she's, trying to play hard, but the editors are kind of doing her dirty. So I hope we get a little
Yeah,
bit of content from her going forward.
yeah. At least we got her yelling at Joe the whole time.
Yeah. Any last thoughts from the episode?
No. I think we're set up for like a pretty explosive ending,
I
and
agree.
I'm very excited for that.
Also think we're due for a season 50 vote next week, probably. I thought it was going to be
You're
today,
right.
but it's been a
I did
while.
too. Any predictions on what it might be?
No, not, we'll just see what happens.
Yeah,
Because, you know, whatever I think, they'll probably go a lot more conservative with what we vote for.
I agree. And hopefully we get some confirmation soon because they're about to go out for 49 if I'm not
49 is
mistaken.
soon, and I've heard rumors that there's a celebrity on 49, some sort of celebrity on 49. So that should be interesting.
It's gonna be like some TikToker. Like
Yeah, exactly. So
it's
we'll see.
we'll see. But
But, thank you guys for watching. If you're on YouTube, please like and subscribe and comment on the video. Just your thoughts on the episode. We'd love to hear them. We've If you are watching and you enjoyed it, please also share with your friends. We also are on podcast form if you like to listen, and you can find us wherever you listen to podcasts on Apple, Spotify, anything like that. So go over there and listen there as well if you'd like. And without further ado, thank you guys so much for tuning in. We'll see you guys next week.
see ya.